Incheon has just become the world's busiest international airport.
The world's busiest airport for international passenger traffic.
Ranked first in the world.
But for more than a decade, that title has belonged to one place: Dubai. In 2025, nearly 95 million international passengers passed through DXB, more than 21 million ahead of Incheon. Yet just 6 months later, preliminary figures put the airport in South Korea at number 1. So how did an airport that only opened in 2001 suddenly overtake some of the most powerful aviation hubs on Earth? What happened thousands of kilometers away to finally push it to number 1? And can Incheon actually stay there? But to understand that, we first have to understand where Incheon actually came from. This is Gimpo Airport, and in the early 1990s it was running out of room. Passenger demand had been growing rapidly, but Gimpo was boxed in by the sprawling city around it. There was just nowhere obvious to build the enormous expansion South Korea believed it would need. So instead of trying to squeeze more capacity out of Gimpo, the government made a massive move. Around 50 kilometers west of Seoul were a handful of islands surrounded by tidal flats. So South Korea decided to try and turn them into an enormous new international airport. Beginning in 1992, seawalls were built, huge areas of land were reclaimed from the sea, and the islands were effectively joined together. But this project was intended to be more than just a Gimpo replacement. From the beginning, the plan was for Incheon to become a major Northeast Asian hub, eventually served by 4 runways and capable of handling vastly more traffic than Seoul needed at the time. When Incheon finally opened in 2001, its first phase could already handle around 40 million passengers a year. And Korea just kept building. 40 million became 54, 54 became 77, and by the end of 2024, after a 4th runway and another expansion of Terminal 2, Incheon could handle around 106 million passengers a year, spending about 18 trillion won or roughly $13 billion on construction. That may seem like overbuilding, but it meant that, unlike most other major hubs, Incheon wasn't playing catch-up. It already had the capacity it needed. But capacity wasn't the only thing to turn Incheon into a global super hub. Korea also built an incredibly powerful network around it. Even before the airport opened, Korean aviation researchers were thinking about Incheon as a connection point between completely different parts of the world. In 1997, Professor Kwang Yu described what he called an hourglass hub. So here's the basic idea. Feed passengers into Incheon on relatively short flights from places like China, Japan, and Southeast Asia, then connect them onto long-haul flights across the Pacific to North America. So a passenger flying from, say, Vietnam to the United States could connect through Seoul, while Korean passengers travelling to America could also fill the same aircraft. And that North American focus is still visible in Incheon's route map today.
Traditionally, a lot of the transit traffic has been going to North America rather than Europe, or regionally in Asia, like into China or into Japan, for example.
And the more destinations you add at either end, the more valuable the entire network becomes. One new flight creates dozens of new possible connections. And nearly 3 decades later, that strategy has worked remarkably well. By the end of 2025, 101 airlines served Incheon, compared with just 47 upon opening. For international passenger flights alone, the airport was connected to 159 destinations, including 18 in North America. But unlike many major airports, Incheon actively tries to build its network. It offers incentives for airline launching new long-haul routes, including landing fee support and marketing funding. And another program worth around 500 million won helps airlines create interline agreements, allowing passengers to connect between different carriers on a single journey. And that's really the entire point of a hub like Incheon, taking what could be a complicated journey involving multiple flights, airlines and airports, and making it feel as seamless as possible. But booking flights can also be just as seamless. Like most people, I don't exactly enjoy booking flights. I search, get redirected to a third-party website, decline all the upsells, and have to constantly retype the same information. But Soar makes all of that easier. It's the same price, or sometimes even cheaper, than Google Flights or Skyscanner, but it remembers your details, and it even checks you in automatically. Then, once you're travelling, Soar sends your boarding pass, gate information, and delay updates straight to you by text. But my favourite feature has to be that if the price of your flight drops after booking, Soar claims back the difference for you. So if you've got a trip coming up and want to step into the future of flying, give Soar a try. Go to soar.flight/airside or scan the QR code on screen now and sign up to get $25 off your first trip. Thanks Soar for sponsoring this video. By the beginning of 2026, South Korea spent decades assembling almost everything Incheon needed to become a global super hub. The capacity, the airlines, and the connections were there, but none of that explains why it suddenly became number 1. because the event that finally pushed Incheon past its rivals happened thousands of kilometers away. Dubai entered 2026 almost untouchable. The previous year, more than 95 million international passengers had passed through DXB. It was the world's busiest international airport, ahead of Incheon by more than 21 million passengers. Then, at the end of February, the US and Israel launched strikes on Iran, triggering Iranian retaliation across the Gulf. Airspace across the region was disrupted. Major Gulf airports were forced to severely restrict operations, and one of the most important connection points between Europe and Asia suddenly became far less reliable. And the effect on Dubai was hard to overstate. In the first 3 months of 2026, DXB handled just 18.6 million passengers, down more than 20% from the year before. And in March alone, traffic collapsed by almost 66%. But that creates an obvious assumption. Millions of passengers who would have normally connected through the Gulf still needed another way between Europe and Asia, and Incheon appeared perfectly placed to take some of them. In fact, according to the airport, the number of passengers travelling from Europe through Incheon and connecting onwards increased by around 2/3 during the first half of the year. But that number is more misleading than it first appears.
The 6% or so growth that you saw in the first half of the year, that was not driven by displaced Gulf Hub traffic. If you're looking at where the Gulf Hub traffic went, it was really scattered across a lot of airports.
In other words, Incheon did pick up some of the displaced passengers, but nowhere near enough to explain its own growth. The war mattered for a different reason. It pushed Dubai, and to a lesser extent Heathrow, backwards. Incheon didn't suddenly steal their passengers, it simply kept growing while the airports ahead of it fell. And that distinction matters because Incheon's own traffic looks very different from somewhere like Dubai.
It's almost purely an international airport. It has transit traffic, but local traffic is still more than transit.
That is crucial. Incheon is a major connecting hub, but most of its passengers aren't simply changing planes between two other countries. Even before a single Gulf airport was disrupted, Incheon was already the third busiest international airport on Earth. In 2025, it handled more than 73 million international passengers, putting it ahead of airports like Singapore Changi. And the total passenger traffic had already reached an all-time record before the war began. Then in 2026, demand for South Korea itself exploded. During the first 6 months of the year, a record 8.23 million international visitors came to Seoul, an increase of more than 21% from the year before. China alone accounted for almost 2.5 million visitors, with another 1.5 coming from Japan. And that's important because it means Incheon's growth isn't entirely dependent on passengers connecting between two other countries. Millions of people actually want to travel to Korea. And this isn't just tourists flooding into Korea. South Koreans themselves are prolific international travellers, giving Incheon a huge outbound market as well. So Incheon effectively has two enormous sources of demand: passengers travelling to and from one of Asia's biggest cities, and connecting passengers using Seoul as the bridge between different parts of the world. And while Dubai's disruption gave Incheon an opening at the top of the ranking, the forces driving Incheon's own growth are much less temporary. And that's clear in the enormous move it's about to make. For decades, two big full-service airlines, Korean Air and Asiana, have competed against each other from the same airport. But that is coming to an end, because in December, the two airlines will become one unified Korean Air. That creates a powerful airline with around 230 aircraft, but for Incheon, the biggest opportunity isn't simply having a larger airline. It's what happens when two separate networks can finally be coordinated as one.
So basically it increases the connecting possibilities in terms of more city pairs, as well as just better connections in existing city pairs as you have more frequencies and better schedules, and a single terminal as well.
So the merger could make Incheon an even more effective connecting hub, without the airport needing millions of entirely new passengers to make the network more useful. There is a downside, of course. The merger will reduce competition, and regulators have forced concessions on a number of routes. But from Incheon's perspective, it also creates something its biggest rivals already have: one enormous home carrier built around a single global hub. And the airlines aren't the only thing changing at Incheon. Even after expanding Incheon to 4 runways and capacity for 106 million passengers a year, planners are already looking at what comes next, including the eventual development of a 5th runway. South Korea appears to be doubling down. But the real question is, can it stay at number 1? Well, maybe, but the first half ranking needs some context. ACI World told Airside that Incheon's figures are based on preliminary raw data and remain subject to final validation. And Dubai's fall was caused by an extraordinary disruption. In 2025, DXB handled more than 95 million international passengers, around 21 million more than Incheon. That gap disappeared because traffic through the Gulf collapsed.
if Dubai fully recovers and Heathrow fully recovers, the gap is too big, at least for now. Incheon will continue to grow, but it'll still probably be single-digit growth. And Dubai is bigger.
And Incheon is hardly alone in Asia. Singapore, Hong Kong, Tokyo, and major Chinese hubs are all competing for many of the same passengers and connecting flows. So calling Incheon the permanent new number one would be premature. But that almost misses the bigger story. Because even if Dubai retakes first place, Incheon has still gone from an airport that only opened 25 years ago to one of the world's most important international hubs. South Korea built capacity before it needed it and created a network designed around connecting East Asia with the rest of the world. And now, with Korean Air and Asiana coming together, that network could become even stronger. The war didn't create Incheon's success, it simply created an opening for a carefully designed strategy built over more than 3 decades to reach the top. Back in 1992, South Korea started building an airport designed to compete with the biggest hubs on Earth. 34 years later, it's finally reached number 1. If you did enjoy this video, don't forget to subscribe to Airside for more aviation documentaries just like this. And once again, thanks to Soar Flights for sponsoring this video. You can check them out in the link in the description.